I sat with my hands folded in my lap as 14 votes went up around that dining table, every single one of them deciding I no longer belonged in this family. I did not flinch, I did not look away. I just watched the chandelier light catch on my mother-in-law's pearls and thought about how, in exactly 9 days, the bank that held the mortgage on this house was going to send her a letter with my signature at the bottom of it. My name is Renata, and I am 38 years old. I run a commercial real estate acquisitions firm out of Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of job where I spend my Tuesdays deciding which struggling property gets a second chance and which one gets quietly absorbed before anyone notices the paperwork. I am good at patience, I am good at silence. I am good at watching people dig their own graves with a shovel they think is a crown. I had been married to Thomas for 11 years, before the heart attack took him on a Sunday morning while he was tying his running shoes on our back porch. Our daughter, Junie, was 7. The grief did not arrive like a wave. It arrived like weather, something that never fully left, just changed shape depending on the season. And through all of it, I kept showing up to Sunday dinners at the Whitfield estate, kept bringing Junie to see her grandmother, kept biting my tongue, because I believed, foolishly, I see now, that family meant something even when it hurt. The Whitfields were old Charlotte money, the kind that didn't shout about it, but made sure you knew anyway. My mother-in-law, Dolores Whitfield, had built her name running a chain of upscale event venues across the Carolinas, the sort of place where every wedding photographer in the city wanted to shoot. She sat on 3 charity boards. She had her own pew, practically at the Baptist church on Providence Road. To everyone outside that family, she was warmth itself, a woman who hugged you a little too long and called you sweetheart in a voice like warm honey. Inside the family, she was something else entirely. She controlled the money. She controlled the calendar. She controlled who got invited where, and who got quietly uninvited the following year. Thomas used to roll his eyes about it when he was alive, used to say, "That's just Mama, she likes being in charge." Like it was a harmless quirk instead of the load-bearing wall of every relationship she touched. He was her only son, her favorite, and when he chose me, a black woman from a working-class family in Greensboro, who put herself through business school on loans and grit, Dolores smiled for the cameras and froze me out everywhere else. When Thomas died, the last thread connecting me to that family snapped, except nobody told Dolores that. She still expected me at every holiday, every birthday, every Sunday dinner, because, in her mind, Junie was a Whitfield first and a Renata and Thomas's daughter second. That night was Easter dinner, and I almost didn't go. Something in my gut told me to stay home, to let Junie's father-in-law drop her off after church instead. But Junie had begged me to come, said she wanted me there for the egg hunt with her cousins, and I have never once in my life been able to say no to that girl's face. The dining room at the Whitfield estate could seat 22 people comfortably, with a table runner imported from somewhere Dolores never failed to mention, and a center hill arrangement of white lilies that smelled like a funeral home no matter the occasion. I sat near the middle, between Junie and my sister-in-law Patrice, quietly cutting into a piece of glazed ham while the conversation drifted toward business, toward the venue company, toward how it was time for fresh leadership since Thomas was gone. I should have seen it coming. I think some part of me did. Dolores tapped her wineglass with a spoon, the sound cutting through the chatter like a gavel. "I think it's time we discuss something as a family," she said, and her eyes found mine across the table with a precision that told me this had been planned, maybe for weeks. "Renata, sweetheart, we all love you. But you haven't been a Whitfield in a long time. Not really. Thomas is gone, God rest him, and I think it's time we had an honest conversation about whether you should still be considered part of this family's events going forward." The room went so quiet I could hear the ceiling fan ticking. "I'd like to put it to a vote," she continued, smoothing her napkin like she was discussing seating arrangements instead of erasing a person from a family tree. "Just so everyone feels heard. All in favor of Renata stepping back from family gatherings. For everyone's comfort, raise your hand." I watched it happen the way you watch a car accident from across the street, distant and slow and somehow inevitable. Patrice's hand went up first, the sister-in-law who used to braid my hair before church when we were still close, before Thomas died and her loyalty quietly migrated back to blood. Then my brother-in-law Garrison. Then 2 cousins I barely knew. Then aunts, uncles, second cousins, the whole sprawling tree of people who had eaten my cooking and borrowed my car and asked me for business advice over the years, every single one of them lifting their hand like it cost them nothing. 14 hands, out of 16 people at that table. Junie, sitting beside me in her yellow Easter dress, looked up with her father's eyes, wide and confused, and whispered, "Mom, why is everybody doing that? Why don't they want us here anymore?" I pulled her into my side and pressed my lips to the top of her head, and I did not say a word, because I did not trust my voice not to shake, and shaking was not something I was going to give Dolores Whitfield the satisfaction of seeing. "Is that really necessary, Dolores?" I finally said, my voice flat and even, the same voice I use when I'm telling a property owner their building is about to be condemned. "In front of my daughter? This isn't personal, Renata," Dolores said, folding her hands like she was at a board meeting instead of a dinner table. "It's about protecting the family's image, protecting the company, protecting what Thomas built." "You understand. What Thomas built," I repeated quietly. "The venue business," she said as if I needed reminding. "It's a Whitfield name on the door. It always will be." I almost laughed. I didn't, because laughing would have given away the one card I still had left to play, and I am too good at my job to fold a winning hand out of spite. What none of them knew, what Thomas himself had never gotten around to mentioning to his mother before he died, because he was tired, so tired, of her using money as a leash, was that 2 years before his death, Thomas had quietly transferred his 31% stake in Whitfield Premier Events into a trust. My trust. Set up by my husband in my name, as protection for Junie's future, with paperwork drawn up by a law firm in Raleigh that Dolores had never heard of, because Thomas knew exactly what his mother was capable of and wanted to make sure his daughter would always have a floor to stand on, no matter what his family decided to do to her mother. I had spent 2 years not touching that stake, 2 years of quiet board meetings I was legally entitled to attend and never did. 2 years of letting Dolores believe she ran that company uncontested, because grief had made me small for a while, made me want to disappear rather than fight. But sitting at that table, watching my 7-year-old's face crumple while 14 hands stayed raised in the air, something in me went very, very still. "I think it's getting late," I said, standing up and gathering Junie's coat from the back of her chair. "Thank you for dinner, Dolores." "Renata," Patrice started, her hand finally lowering, a flicker of something like shame crossing her face. "It's fine," I said, and I meant it, because for the first time in 2 years it actually was. We drove home in silence, Junie's small hand in mine on the console between us, and I did not turn the radio on. I let the hum of the highway fill the car instead, let myself feel every mile of distance between that dining room and the rest of my life. When we got home, I made her a grilled cheese sandwich because that's what she wanted, and I sat with her at our kitchen island while she ate it. And I told her that some people don't know how to love you the way you deserve, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. She nodded like she understood the way 7-year-olds do, half comprehension and half trust that Mom will handle it. After she went to bed, I sat alone at that same kitchen island with my laptop open and a cup of chamomile tea going cold beside me, and I started reading. I read the trust documents first, every clause, even though I had read them a dozen times before. I read the bylaws of Whitfield Premier Events, all 41 pages, the ones Dolores had drafted herself, and clearly never expected anyone with 31% voting power to actually read. I read about quarterly board meeting requirements, about minority shareholder rights, about the clause, buried on page 28, in language so dense it was practically designed to be skimmed past, that gave any shareholder holding more than 25% the right to call a special audit of company finances with 72 hours notice. I am not by nature a vengeful person. I want to be clear about that because I know how this sounds. I have spent my career being the person who finds the quiet, legal, surgical solution instead of the loud one. But somewhere around midnight, scrolling through 3 years of Whitfield Premier Events financial filings that I, as a silent shareholder, was fully entitled to access, I found something that had nothing to do with revenge at all and everything to do with the truth. Dolores Whitfield had been moving money, not in some dramatic, obvious way. In small, careful increments, the kind only someone who'd spent a career reading financial statements for a living would catch. Consulting fees paid to a company called Whitfield Family Holdings LLC, an entity that, when I traced it through the Secretary of State's business registry at 1 in the morning, led directly back to a personal account held jointly by Dolores and her younger son, my brother-in-law Garrison, the one who'd raised his hand fastest at dinner. Nearly $400,000 over 3 years, dressed up as marketing and brand consulting, flowing quietly out of the company Thomas had spent his adult life building, and into accounts that funded Garrison's gambling habit, a habit I happened to know about because Patrice, back when we were still close, had cried to me about it once over coffee, terrified her husband was going to lose their house. I sat there in my kitchen at 1 in the morning, and I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was clarity. The kind you get when a fog you didn't know you were standing in finally lifts. I closed my laptop, I went to bed, and I slept better than I had in 2 years. The next morning, I called my attorney, a sharp, unflappable woman named Adele Okafor, who had handled Thomas's estate and who I trusted with things I didn't trust anyone else with. I told her everything, the vote, the trust, the consulting fees, all of it, and asked her one question: was I within my rights to call for a formal audit as a 31% shareholder? Renata, she said, and I could hear her sitting up straighter through the phone, you're not just within your rights. You're required to. If you suspect fraud and you do nothing, you could be exposed too. Send me everything you have. I spent that day at my actual job, because the world does not stop turning just because your in-laws tried to erase you from a family portrait. I closed on a strip mall acquisition in Matthews, took 2 calls about a stalled development in Fort Mill, and answered emails like a normal person, while underneath all of it, a different kind of work was happening in the background, quiet and exact. By Wednesday, Adele had drafted the formal demand letter, invoking my rights under the company bylaws, requesting a full independent audit of Whitfield Premier Events finances going back 4 years, with specific attention to the Whitfield Family Holdings LLC payments. It was sent by courier to the company's registered office, which was, conveniently, Dolores's own dining room, the same room where 14 hands had gone up 9 days earlier. I did not call to warn her. I did not need to. The letter would do the talking I'd spent 2 years not doing. She called me Thursday morning, her honeyed voice gone thin and sharp around the edges. Renata, what is the meaning of this? An audit? After everything this family has done for you? After everything this family has done for me, I repeated, standing in my kitchen, Junie's cereal bowl still in the sink behind me. Is exactly why I'm doing it, Dolores. I have a 31% stake in your company, legally documented, courtesy of your son. I have every right under your own bylaws to request this audit. I'd suggest you cooperate because right now, this is between us. The minute outside investigators start finding things, it stops being between us. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that told me she was doing math, fast, the kind of math that involves church boards and charity galas and a reputation built over 30 years. You wouldn't, she said finally, quieter now, you wouldn't drag this family's name through that. I didn't drag anyone anywhere, I said. 14 hands did that at your dinner table. I just turned the lights on. I won't pretend the next 2 weeks were simple. Adele brought in a forensic accountant, a methodical man named Pruitt, who spoke almost entirely in spreadsheets and asked me precise, careful questions about timelines. The audit confirmed what I already suspected and then some. Nearly $600,000 redirected out of the company over 4 years when you traced every thread, some of it to Garrison's accounts, some of it to a second mortgage Dolores had quietly taken out on the venue's flagship property without informing the other shareholders. A property that, under the bylaws, required unanimous board approval for any lien above a certain threshold. She did not have unanimous approval. She had never asked for it because she had never imagined anyone was paying close enough attention to stop her. I requested an emergency board meeting, exercising rights I had never once used in 2 years of quiet shareholding. Patrice came. Garrison did not, which told me everything. Dolores sat at the head of the same conference table where she'd once told me I wasn't really a Whitfield, her face arranged into something brittle and composed, while Adele laid out the findings in flat, unemotional language, the kind that doesn't need volume to land like a verdict. I did not gloat. I want to be honest about that too, because there is a version of this story where I stand up and deliver some triumphant speech about karma, and that is not what happened. What happened is that I sat quietly while Pruitt walked through page after page of misappropriated funds, while Dolores's face went from defiant to gray, while Patrice put her hand over her mouth and finally understood why I'd kept my distance from Garrison and his investments for years. In the end, the board, what was left of it once the dust settled, voted to remove Dolores as managing director, pending repayment of the misappropriated funds, with the option of criminal referral left explicitly on the table if restitution wasn't made within 90 days. Garrison lost his position entirely, and is, as far as I know, still working out a payment plan with the company's attorneys instead of a payment plan with a bookie. The venue company itself survived, restructured under new management, with a clause I personally insisted on requiring quarterly transparency reports to every shareholder, no matter how small their stake. Dolores's church board asked her to step down 2 months later, quietly, the way these things happen among people who've spent their lives caring deeply about appearances. I heard about it from Patrice, who calls me now, sometimes in a way she didn't for the 2 years after Thomas died. We are not close, not the way we once were, but there is something honest between us now that wasn't there before. Something that survived the wreckage better than the rest of the family did. I still bring Junie to see her grandmother when Dolores asks, which is rarely and always carefully, the honey gone out of her voice for good. I do it because Junie deserves to know where half of Heifer comes from, even the parts that are complicated, even the parts that voted her mother out of a dining room on a Tuesday and called it protecting the family. But I have never, not once, sat at the head of that long mahogany table again. Some rooms you don't walk back into. You just make sure the people who tried to push you out of them spend the rest of their lives explaining to everyone else why the chair across from them stayed empty.